Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Coach and Benway podcast. I'm Coach Red Pill, joined as always by Dr. Benway. Dr. Benway, today we're going to be discussing Bill Cunningham and the idea of couture as art. And I'm very interested in this topic for reasons we'll get into right now. So, Dr. Benway, I don't know if you want to intro who Bill Cunningham was or you want me to handle it?
I'll do a very brief intro. Essentially, throughout much of, let's say, the 20th century, Bill Cunningham was a sort of Boston-born Catholic who wound up heading his way to New York, starting in the fashion industry as a hat designer, eventually converting himself into a photographer of, broadly speaking, fashion, though I would argue a lot more to it than that. Worked for the New York Times. I had a couple of columns, one on fashion in the street in general, and the other on sort of like what was going on in high society parties, if you will. What was interesting to me, number one, his lifestyle. He was effectively an aesthete monk. But number two, it was interesting that you thought that Bill was an interesting peek into a discussion of haute couture. It was weird in watching that documentary that you had suggested I watch. I was quickly dissuaded from thinking that was his focus.
Yeah.
Haute couture as such. Immediately, it says based on what he was photographing, what he was interested, his commentary on everything. Like, yes, he's interested in clothing to an extent, but I mean, haute couture in and of itself, I feel like most of what he photographed wasn't even haute couture.
Yeah.
So that was curious to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much if haute couture is art. It's the idea of clothes as an aesthetic object, an object for discussion and whether it's worthwhile or not. Because to tell you the truth, I'm of two minds about it. On the one hand, there's the obvious issue that clothing are just eminently practical. Think of blue jeans. But then you can make the idea, the suggestion that jeans can be made into kind of clothes that are artful, that sort of like transcend their origin and express something more profound. I can't quite explain it. Here's my problem with couture, and I just want to say it out from the outside. I recognize that it's art, but I can't quite define it. It's a little bit like the Potter Stewart hedge. Potter Stewart, the Supreme Court justice who famously could not define pornography and just said, well, I recognize it when I see it, which is no standard at all, of course. And yet at the same time, it's something that we all understand, that sometimes we can recognize something to be of a category, and yet we can't quite define it. You see what I'm saying? And I feel that's my problem with haute couture and whether it's art or not.
Well, here's the thing about that, and I think Bill himself is of two minds about it. Let me get into what I'm saying before I say what I think Bill is doing or was doing. The image or the other artist who came to mind throughout this whole examination of Bill Cunningham for me was Federico Fellini.
Mm-hmm.
Without any question. I mean, it was that notion of looking at the almost carnivalesque nature of the society around you. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about Bill when I was looking at what he was photographing, because he didn't necessarily just photograph the high style houses. He was photographing random people on the street.
Yeah. And
I thought to myself, okay, haute couture in and of itself isn't his main focus. Then is it just clothing? And then there were moments in this documentary where, even that seemed to me just a gloss for what he was really doing. For example, there's a scene where he is working with his assistant in the New York Times, putting together his column of all his photographs. And then there's this older fashioned woman. He said it stuck in my mind because he says she's just out of a John Singer Sargent painting, and of course his assistant says who or what, I just wanted to hit him in the head for not knowing.
I disliked the assistant very much, by the way, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, he was totally. I wouldn't want his job because I've been in the middleman helping some fucker get his shit together.
Right.
But at the same time, he was annoying. But anyway, back to that point. He says she's out of a Singer Sargent painting, and yes, you will notice clothing in Singer Sargent, but it's also the way people compose themselves. In fact, when he's cropping the photo to fit room, he at first, the assistant cuts off her hands, and Bill says, "No, don't cut off her hands. This is the most dignified woman
Yeah.
in the town. You show her hands." I'm like, her hands have nothing to do with the clothing. You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He is not focused necessarily on the clothing. It's the carnival of the society. And in fact, the documentary's title to me kind of gave the game away, right? I mean, it's Bill Cunningham, New York, not Bill Cunningham's photography in New York.
Exactly.
Bill Cunningham, and he's really documenting the city. And yes, the clothing is the vehicle by which he can do that, right? I mean, it's his interest, and of course, all the fabrics and styles. He knows the history of everything, but he also loves to photograph the bag ladies, right, of New York.
And he photographs the odd people, the interesting people, the interesting people, and he sort of like puts it on the pages of the New York Times with the excuse that he's photographing or showing the current fashion. And there are some of his pieces, because look, I lived in New York City in the late 90s, very early 2000s, right? I had a loft in downtown Manhattan, and every Saturday, Sunday, I would read Bill Cunningham. He was something to look forward to. And he was like an institution, but not an institution like a dead thing, like a museum, but just very vibrant and alive, because he was capturing the city as it was. And one of the great things about the great dichotomies or at loggerheads was that he was capturing things as they were, whereas the New York Times has always prided itself with imposing a narrative on the news. And that kind of juxtaposition, retrospectively, I find kind of interesting, because Bill Cunningham was really out there on the street reacting to what he saw on the street. And he saw the street as an endless runway of people parading around in their clothes. And the vast majority of us are quite boring to somebody like him. But he would pick out of the millions of people that he saw, he would pick out the ones that were interesting. And it wasn't just the clothes. It was the style. It was really interesting. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, it's not like he was looking for people who, these exotic fabrics and everything. I mean, like just ratty T-shirts could be just as interesting to this guy. And it's funny how much, when you say like he photographed New York, it's not, I mean, one of the things that's interesting to me about him is when we say he was documenting New York, it's important to stress that it wasn't just like, that was his day job. It literally was the only thing he did, full stop.
Yeah.
One of the things you get about learning about him when you finally go to his quote unquote apartment is that literally all of the space in there is just dedicated to the photographs. He sleeps on a cot.
Yeah.
He doesn't have his own bathroom or a kitchen, or at least at the time of this documentary he did.
Yeah, it was
literally there was no private life. Monkish, and keep that idea alive, because I think he probably saw it in those terms. I
agree,
because he was Catholic.
Yeah,
and it was clear in the moment in the documentary that the church is very important to him.
Yeah, and we have to sort of not emphasize, but acknowledge something really fascinating and heartbreaking about this man. Well, it's clear that he was by temperament homosexual, and I have no doubt whatsoever that he probably never acted on those homosexual impulses, because it's clear on seeing the documentary that though he never says this explicitly, the anguish in his life is quite clear. That his sexual desires went against his moral vision, and he subsumed his sexual and romantic longings and any kind of a personal life in pursuit of this profession that he had that consumed everything in his life. The apartment he has, it seems to me, sort of like is a metaphor for his very life, because in this apartment that he had it in the in the place where
Carnegie Hall.
In Carnegie Hall, the Carnegie Hall apartments. It was a fairly large size apartment, at least from what you could see, and it was filled with these file cabinets full of photographs of decades and decades of photographs. And it's remarkable, because you realize that he had filled up his life with the photographs that he took, and his personal life was reduced to just a cot. And he would just have a sandwich and live in the cot and just work. And he had these work clothes that he would go with everywhere. And apparently he owned a tuxedo with which he would wear to go and do the fashion shots that he needed for the newspaper. And the fashion shots at the soirees of the oligarchs or what have you, he was there and he would photograph people, but he would photograph the interesting people. And it was interesting because the people there in the documentary recognized that he only picked the people that he found interesting. And if he didn't find you interesting, these people, these very rich and powerful people, were devastated that Bill Cunningham did not find them interesting. It was very funny that this small man, because he was physically quite small apparently, with a very reduced life, he commanded such power, such social power, that these highfalutin people, these very, very rich people who earned per day more than he probably made per year or per decade even, he could crush them by just like glancing at them and just turning away and not photographing them. It was really, the power that he had over New York society is really interesting. Yeah, but he didn't mismanage it. That was interesting also. He was very aware of it, but he didn't abuse it or use it lightly. I thought that was powerful.
I think that the guidance from the church probably helped.
Yes.
That. I don't mean like I don't mean like that the father told him this is how you do it, son.
No.
It's more like the teachings of the church were very much in tune into his mind, because he actually, this was what I also found interesting. He felt in order to have his freedom, he had to reject pretty much all but the bare subsistence of money for his existence. Like I think was on the receiving end by virtue of one of the earlier magazines he worked on, if not developed, probably a very good sum of money to kind of just walk away in comfortable retirement. And I think he kept refusing it. He talked about tearing checks up. I'm willing to bet the man was intentionally underpaid even at the New York Times for what he was doing. But that was the goal, and in so doing, he never, you can be in a position where you don't feel beholden. And I think the ultimate sign of his strength to me, you kind of hinted it, but we'll say who exactly explicitly said the what you were referencing. Anna Wintour, the great editor of, is it Vogue fashion?
Vogue.
What is she?
Vogue.
Okay, she edits Vogue. She was the one who said, if Bill didn't pay attention to you, it was devastating.
Yeah.
This is the woman who probably more directly and monomaniacally and in an evil sense controls the sense of fashion. For those of you who don't know, The Devil Wears Prada is more or less based on Anna Wintour.
Yeah, but one has to say one thing, though, that the vision of Miranda Priestley in The Devil Wears Prada is more malevolent than the actual Anna Wintour. Anna Wintour is an elitist, but she's not evil, okay? And she's acutely aware of her position insofar as fashion, insofar as the power of the fashion magazine to dictate an enormous business that employs thousands of people, not just in the New York fashion scene, but also around the world. And so yeah, but
I'll phrase it in the language that Bill would have used. She is of a fallen world. Bill is outside of it, as a monk or man of the church would have been.
Yeah.
So that's why he is critiqued. Even though when you see him on the street, it's not like this is awful, that's good. He's just noticing what he thinks is important and is depicting it. In fact, one of the other signs of something that I think really summarizes his focus was there was a magazine, I forget which one he was working on, and he was doing basically the outfits that were on the runway as they were kind of presented in their full idealized form, and then people on the street wearing them. And he just wanted to show that, the difference, how people would use it. He didn't have a negative judgment to the people on the street, but his photographs were used to, kind of say, this is how you should wear it, and this is the stupid way, the hoi polloi wear it. And he was so angry with that, so devastated with that, he cut off his relationship with that magazine.
Yeah.
But that's the compelling kind of part here. He's trying to show the vivaciousness of the people who would wear these. I mean, yes, the clothing are a vehicle for that, but I mean that's very democratic. It's judgmental but democratic, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, because there's a great deal of generosity in his vision of people. I mean, he might dismiss you because you're not wearing interesting clothes, but he's not dismissing you out of arrogance, and that shines through. That it was extremely clear about the man. Because he has only a finite number of frames to shoot in his camera, and he shot, by the way, with old style cameras, even though there were digital cameras at the time. He shot things that were interesting, and he dismissed things that were not interesting, but he didn't dismiss them in an arrogant way, and he didn't look down on people. And I think that that's the thing. Just as he didn't look down on people, he didn't look up at people. And of course, for those who are self-important, that's the ultimate power. A man who does not look up to those who are self-important is a dangerous man, a man to be feared, and a very Christian attitude. That's the thing that the documentary kind of like, it showed it but refused to articulate it as such, that he was a true embodiment of a Christian man in a very powerful way. A Christian man.
They save it for the very end, yeah, and it's only a few fleeting moments.
Yeah. It was really about the sexuality issue, because the documentary makers were they were clearly like trying to they were leering into that issue of sexuality, which I thought was nasty.
I kind of want to articulate that bit because I think they are reading it one way, and I don't read it necessarily that way. So the scene comes at the end where, yes, you get Bill's actions, right? He's photographing on the street. Then they say, "Oh, we're going to show you in his private life," but what you realize is his private life in his apartment is the same thing, as his public life. It's just the storage for it.
Yeah.
But then the only time they get close to his inner life, if you will, at the end, I think they're in his apartment, and they say, they're talking about, "Did you have any relationships in your life?" He's like, "Are you just basically asking if I'm gay?"
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah. He says, "Yeah, I probably have that temperament, and this is why, I do the parents didn't want to talk about the fashion, this, that, and the other." He's not emotionally fazed by that.
No.
Then they ask him, "Is religion, you go to church every Sunday, is religion important?" Then he starts tearing up.
Yeah.
Very dramatically. And he says, "Yeah, it's good. It's very important rules to live by." Now, I think they want to interpret that as the teachings of the church would tell him that his lifestyle as a gay man is wrong. If anything, he's doing exactly on that front what the church is telling him to do, which is don't act on it.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Something else. I think if he's judgmental at all, it's that he should have been a monk in the church, not a proxy of a monk looking at,
looking at it from the outside. Yeah.
That's my read on it, because he acts like a monk. If he were alive in the Middle Ages, he would be working with, not literally, because who knows where he would have been. He would, like Thomas Aquinas was basically a monk in the late Middle Ages, or they were illuminating manuscripts, or they were, doing hymns. They were occupied in aesthetic matters, but within the context of the church. I think Bill's mind was in that zone. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but it's I have to admit. Okay, let me rephrase this. It's not that I admit that I admire him. I admire him. Full stop. It's not that. It's not anything to be kept hidden. He was an honorable man and doing something that I respect very much. How could I put this? I think that his homosexual proclivities and the way he handled them speaks very well of him. There are a couple of other people that I've known that did something similar. One whom I never met personally, but I knew of in Chile, was a famous senator. His name was Jaime Guzman, and he was a handful, quite frankly. But he was a man who deliberately subsumed he was clearly homosexual. Just looking at him, you knew he was homosexual. But he remained a lifelong bachelor, lived with his mother, never had any kind of homosexual relationship, and was deeply devout. And I admire those men who have decided, consciously, that they are not going to go with the fashion. They are going to decide to, submerge their sexuality and transcend it. I find that eminently respectable, especially as a man who I'm heterosexual. But I have to admit that there have been many times in my life where my sexual appetites have overwhelmed me and have not caused great damage in my life, but certainly caused problems, if you will. and that strength of will, of character, to decide, my sexual appetites, I'm going to sublimate them and redirect that energy, that sexual energy, into something more worthwhile than my hedonistic pleasure.
Yeah.
You see something very profound, and let me just dive into something more personal, or something that happened to me once. I saw in recent New Year's in London, as a matter of fact. It was the 31st of December. And I was, the day, the evening, it was like, I don't know, 6 or 7 in the evening. And I was traveling by underground from here to there, I forget where. And there was this homosexual couple. And like one of the men was dressed up in a ridiculous outfit, like, just very gay, but screamingly gay. He would fit in a great gay pride parade. And everybody in the metro station was studiously not avoiding looking at him, but just studiously ignoring him. Okay, and he was clearly depressed. He clearly just bereft, and his homosexual partner, who was more normal, if you will, he frankly he looked like a bartender at a pub, right? He was sort of like comforting him, saying, "Oh, it's okay, it's all right." And I thought to myself, this is what you arrive at when you decide to be fashionably gay, to let the gay out of the closet. You are essentially miserable because you know fundamentally that what your attitude and your sexual expression in that idiotic phrase is fundamentally wrong. Uh, I am not anti-homosexual because it would be absurd. It would be like saying I'm anti-left-handed people. Sexual proclivity, I do believe in, and I think that most science has shown this quite vehemently. It's inborn. But the issue is not so much what preferences you are inborn with, but rather how you act on them. And I think that the fact that Bill Cunningham and men like him decided to sublimate their sexual urges and redirect that the sexual energy towards something more productive, I think speaks well of them. And I think that the quote unquote sacrifice, that hedonistic people would see it as a sacrifice, I think it's actually quite profound and quite beautiful and quite powerful, because they left something much more profound in their wake than mere sexual adventures and a few anecdotes to tell. In the case of Mike Cunningham, you have an apartment full of file cabinets of wonderful photographs and a body of work that means something, that matters. People will look at those pictures to understand the times. And it is a part of cultural history. He contributed significantly to the cultural history. And this gentleman, Jaime Guzman, whom you, Benway, and the listeners probably have no idea who he is, but he was the architect of the Chilean Constitution of 1980, which is currently in effect. He was the architect of a lot of the political dynamics in Chile, and he was the architect of the measures that led to the end of the Pinochet dictatorship. Because a lot of people call him a fascist and call him this and that, but he was the one who set up the conditions by which the Pinochet dictatorship would leave power in a peaceful manner, which they did. Okay, so that was something productive and worthwhile. Would we have seen it had he given in gleefully to his sexual appetites? I doubt it. You see what I mean?
Well, what you've just articulated is there's two ways of thinking about this. People have articulated this. Mm-hmm. The most obvious one, the least religious one, is Freud. Freud very directly says we all sublimate sexual energy to other creative outputs, and his example was homosexuals are actually the best at this because that's why they produce some of the best art, because they're in some cases completely sublimating sexual energy. Arguably, you could say that's exactly what happened to Bill. The church, more or less, they wouldn't phrase it exactly that same way, but they more or less think that same way. And the thing with the church is you don't have to be gay to be the only person sublimating. Every single person has carnal desires that can be sublimated. And I know some people would say like, oh, blah, 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 sex is a wonderful thing. Well, anybody who has given themselves over just to, chasing the latest tale, or be it man or woman, and you being man or woman, it doesn't really matter. Everybody probably gets to a certain point if you go down that route where you feel very empty inside. You've put all of your efforts into a short-term gratification, and it's draining it, and it leaves you empty. The church's response was always, You direct that towards creation of something, either a family, or if for whatever reason that is not within your capability, generally enter the church and do it through the evangelization work of the church effectively. That was, I mean, it's essentially the same thing. That's more of the ecclesiastical version of it. But like I said, it's unsurprising to me that Bill was very much a Catholic at heart. He operated like one. He was effectively a monk outside of the church. Now, what the interesting thing, and it gets to your question of, haute couture being art, because that, I think, is the moral challenge that I honest to God believe that's what Bill was concerned about. Is what you're depicting important enough? Is it worth it relative to all of the other things you could be focused on as an artist? That's why I said I think he has to get around it by saying it's more than just the clothing. Not to say that the clothing has no part in it. That's clearly the details he was noticing. But the clothes were part of the human pageantry. Right. That's what it has to be. And like you said, when he would photograph the interesting people weren't even just the famous people, right? There was a bit where I think, oh God, what's her name? One of the great French actresses, Catherine Deneuve, was like somewhere. All the photographers were jumping to Catherine Deneuve. Bill's like, but I didn't think she was doing anything or wearing anything interesting. So he started photographing the people around her who were photographing her. And that's what is interesting. But the thing is, he's depicting that pageantry of everything. It's also not a shock to me when he was going to those soirees, right? Yes, the clothing are a part of it, but what was great was when there was a bit where he was photographing Brooke Astor's, I forget what celebration it was. She must have been near 100. And she is probably was the last living link to the Age of Innocence period. You know what I mean? She would have been a child when that generation was in their middle to late ages. Right. So he is capturing that spirit of the city, in an odd way.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, look, as an anthropologist, as a historian of the quotidian, his place is secure. Now, turning over to the issue of couture as art. I mean, because we basically spent the first half hour discussing this fine gentleman. And the fact that he passed away is terribly sad, because one of the things that struck me about him was that he was such a cheerful man, that he just sort of made every place that he was at just a little bit happier, just by his mere presence. He was always smiling and always, I hate to use the word upbeat because that sounds so, I don't know, pedestrian or plastic somehow.
Right.
But he was always upbeat. He always gave a little upward tilt to the environment he was in, And it wasn't just because when he showed up, everybody sort of turned on because they wanted to glow so that he might take a picture of it.
He was cheerful when someone told him to go fuck himself for taking their photo.
Yeah.
He'd get giggly about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody did tell him to fuck off?
Yeah, there's a scene in the documentary that made me laugh. There's a couple of African-American women he was photographing, and he said, don't you fucking photograph me or I'll shove that camera up your ass, or something to that effect. And you just see him smiling and then riding his bike off. Yeah.
Yeah. It was so iconic the way he was dressed. He was dressed in that blue jacket.
It was a workman's shirt. Intention. Yeah. That was the other great thing about him. For all that love of haute couture, he never dressed that way himself. He said, I get a workman's shirt because
himself. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he said, I got the workman's shirt because when you're carrying all these cameras and you have a nice fabric, it's just going to wear it out anyway. So I do that. And the other thing I love is, it's raining, so I have a poncho, a very cheap poncho. And he says, they rip so quickly anyway. And I figure, they're so cheap. Why keep buying them? He just would duct tape them up until they were ready to go. I mean,
more duct tape than plastic. Yeah, it was.
And that is such a dedication to do that, because it is so hard to live like that. You know what I mean? You had to believe in it, and you believed in the content of what you were depicting so much that even you yourself didn't have to. It wasn't for your own participation in the sense that, I like these clothing because I want to wear them. It didn't seem like he had the desire to do that.
No interest whatsoever. He had no interest in the scene. Because that's the other thing. See, because of his position, he could have been a member of the scene instantly. And he could have monetized his position, to use that phrase. He could have monetized his position and gotten big bucks. Posthumously, he published a book. But apparently he had written the book quite some years before, over a number of years, and had it done, and deliberately waited until he was dead. So clearly the guy was not like trying to make a buck off of what he was doing. He was just not interested in anything material, except insofar as his actual work is concerned. Now, the thing that I didn't like about the documentary is that it sort of like glossed over the middle period of his life, when he transitioned from being a milliner to being a photographer. It wasn't crystal clear how that evolution, or at least I don't recall it that being that crystal clear. I saw the documentary quite some time ago. I do believe when it came out, as a matter of fact. I don't recall, because he was a milliner, that is a man who made women's hats. And when women no longer wore hats, he essentially went out of business. And I wasn't clear as to the transition. And it was also clear what kind of life he was living before, when he had been a milliner, when he had been in the fashion industry. Because as a photographer, yeah, he was part of the fashion industry, but it was more like on the peripheries of it, and an outsider. Whereas as a milliner, he was on the inside. So I'm kind of curious as to what kind of a lifestyle, how did he live during that period?
Well, from what I gather, he already was at the Carnegie Hall when he was a milliner. I think he was already, because he was showing the women who lived there at the time and who lived there when the documentary was made, his hats. But you're right, they did. I don't know how that transition from creator to observer happened. You know what I mean? That wasn't entirely clear. I mean, I have suspicions, but I don't really know. Right. And he's the type of person who probably wouldn't go out of his way to make it known.
Yeah, I'm kind of, yeah. I mean, he was very careful about his privacy, and that's perfectly respectable. But it's sad to think that he's gone. It really is, because I'd never met the man. I only enjoyed his work in the pages of the New York Times. But there's something sad when a man like that dies, because it's not so much that he was an important figure, but he was a cheerful figure, and that is a powerful feeling. I'm surprised at the feeling, because of course he was likable, sure, but it's not merely that he was likable. There are lots of likable guys, and they die and like, oh shit, what a shame, he dropped dead. What's for dinner? You know what I mean? But with Cunningham, it was more than that. There was something.
Well, my suspicion here, the way I would probably articulate it is, there is a certain attitude you get when you have, particularly around religious people who achieve, it's not necessarily a nirvana, though it comes close to it.
A transcendence.
A transcendence, there's an inner light, if you will, about said person. They make manifest the potential, right, of humans. Not in the sense that, he achieved these fantastic, wonderful things in and of themselves, but it's just, an achieved person, if you will, in some regards. And, those lights are hard to find now. And when they do go away, it's very sad. And I think he probably was one of them.
Oh, yeah. Just a sad thing. But anyway, moving on to transition to the topic of couture as art. How can I put it? Sometimes you wear clothes and they're just your workaday clothes. And sometimes you put on some clothes and you feel stylish, and you catch yourself in some reflection as you're walking down the street, and you say, damn, I look good. I look as good as I'll ever look. The clothes somehow bring you out. Coco Chanel had the famous line, Coco Chanel, of course, the designer. She said, when a woman is well-dressed, you notice the dress. When a woman is impeccably dressed, you notice the woman. And,
yes.
And there's something about that that's very true. When I am well-dressed, when I'm wearing a suit and I know that I'm wearing it well, right? Or a sports jacket or whatever, but I know that it just fits me. It just, not just in terms of like the cut, but also just stylistically, it just fits my personality. I feel that I transcend the clothes and I'm more properly myself. And it feels wonderful, quite frankly. And so there are two things about clothing. And let's just call it couture so we could talk about it on a more elevated plane. There's the issue of the subjective sensation when you're well dressed and the objective sensation or experience of clothes as aesthetic objects. Now, I first noticed clothes as aesthetic objects in the 80s with, bizarrely enough, Miami Vice. That sounds absurd, but that was the first TV show that I started looking at the clothes as clothes and saying, Jesus, that's fucking weird. But I liked the weird stylization of the clothes. And then I started paying attention to Giorgio Armani's clothes because shortly thereafter came the movie The Untouchables, where he designed the clothes. And the clothes, I found them luminous in that movie. They were perfectly of the time period. It's not that he Armani'd the costumes. They were of the period, but they looked somehow luminescent. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. To this day, quite frankly, I can't quite put my finger on it, of why the clothes that he put on the characters, which was completely logical and historically accurate, and yet somehow elevated the characters, made them more distinct. I found that fantastic costume design. It's a pity that he didn't do more movies, quite frankly. I myself was fortunate enough to own an Armani jacket a few years later. And yeah, I felt fantastic in it. I felt slick. I felt, I could put on a t-shirt and jeans and that jacket, and I felt transcendent, right? And so there are two issues, of course. There's that subjective feeling and that objective feeling of clothes. Would you agree with me as the starting point for this conversation on the issue?
Yes, I mean, well, the way I would kind of phrase it, I forgot who said this. I heard it in an interview, and I still think it's a good point that few have actually responded to well, which was, look, if you are going to look for great art to elevate what you read, if you're going to look for great art to elevate what you watch, be it either film, television, painting, or if you're going to do it in music, if you're going to look at it in the architecture, the buildings you occupy and live in, why not what you wear? It makes no sense to suddenly disentangle
slum
that.
it. Yeah, slum it in your clothes. Yeah, I agree.
Well, I mean, you can certainly say there's functionality and the need to be unrestricted, but there, even in that, there's ways of having a high artifice to that. So yeah, of course, I'd agree.
Yeah, no. But I mean, but that issue of, like, on the one hand, you have the objective look as to whether something is artful or not, and then the subjective experience of whether the clothes elevate you or not.
Well, but that's, if you're going to accept anything as artistic, then that has to be a standard axiomatic first principle, right? That's how art functions.
Yeah, but the thing is, you can't wear a movie. You know what I'm saying? You can only experience it from the outside.
You have a subjective experience of the movie, just as you have the objective experience of the clothing. And yes, there's a personal element to that, because at the end of the day, and I think this is what you get from Bill's take on things, just wearing what you are supposed to be wearing because it's in vogue, right? Sometimes literally in vogue, is not really fulfilling that function. You're doing what you're told to do.
Mm-hmm.
You're making an artistic choice in what you wear, right? And Bill, in my mind, from what I gathered, was noting those moments when people made compelling artistic choices in what they wore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I see what you're saying. Um, my feeling about clothes is that, how would I put it? Something else happens to me, and I don't know about your experience, but this has been mine insofar as suits are concerned. See, I usually get my suits at a tailor's in Chile. And what they are is basically, there's a few models, and you pick the model that sort of like fits you, and you're gently nudged by the tailor. And then, the tailor says, okay, let me take your measurements, and he goes away, and, between 2 and 4 weeks later, he calls you up and says, "Well, your suit's ready. When you come in here, and we'll do the fitting." And you go and get the fitting done. It takes you an hour or so, maybe, just to tidy up everything. And there you go. You're done with your suit, and you get a suit that was made for you, or I do at least. And the suit makes you feel terrific because it's for you, right? Whereas on the other hand, I have the experience of going to Brooks Brothers and picking up some sports jackets, and they alter them here or there, but they're already pre-made. Um, and for some reason, Brooks Brothers for me is the store that things fit, not Paul Stewart or J Press. I don't know if J Press is even around anymore. But Brooks Brothers, even though it's a worldwide chain and it's machine made by little Chinamen or whatever, the clothes
Mm-hmm.
there fit me. Okay, I'm talking about the to call them like the middling clothes. The sports jackets, the shirts. The
I
shirts.
wear them. I
Yeah,
wear Brooks Brothers. Most men will, I know at work, wear Brooks Brothers
yeah,
for that reason.
yeah, exactly. Because you go underneath the radar. It's unnoticeable clothing. Okay, and in my own case, it tends to fit me well. It fits me well, and so yeah, sure. And what I basically do is every 2, 3, 4 years or something, no less than two, and no more than four, I'll just sort of like go to Brooks Brothers and buy all new sports jackets and throw out the old, and that's that. I got a new wardrobe, which is pretty much the same as the old wardrobe, quite frankly. And yeah, that's the clothes I like to wear on a daily basis. Although I have to admit, here in Ukraine, I've been falling into the habit of using t-shirts and jeans because I really don't have much of an opportunity to wear quote unquote nice clothes. And
Hmm.
oddly enough, the fashion here in Ukraine, it doesn't really matter how the guy is dressed up. That's why you have so many like Russian gangsters and crap, like in the movies and in real life. They're walking around in tracksuits, because a lot of times
Right.
it just does not matter. Because ultimately, a lot of times the clothes that
Yeah,
you
but are
wear,
they squatting? Are they squatting? That's the key.
yeah. But like yeah, you go in most Western cities. If you're dressed in nice slacks, a nice shirt, and a nice Brooks Brothers jacket, you can pretty much get in everywhere. And in point of fact, that's the uniform you need to wear in order to be taken seriously. Uh, would you agree with that
Well,
statement?
you described something I certainly experienced. There's certainly those clothings that I will, and it's the ones I wear to most days, just for work. I just what fits, what's in a color that I approve of, and that's that. And I don't feel that's necessarily an artistic expression. I feel like that's just dressing well enough for what I have to do.
Right.
But I have had experiences earlier when the artistic expression of what I was wearing came out, and that's usually, to your point, when I had a suit made for me, or at least significantly, I went out of my way to pick one that I particularly like, and I tend to get very I almost interfere too much with it. I just said I want the lapels this length or this width. I wanted two or one button at the most, the jacket, and I want the vest to be this way, the pants to be this. I get very particular on that because then it's now a matter of I'm really designing it. You're kind of fulfilling my
Yeah.
function. And honestly, the other time I felt that, and this will sound strange, but for one Halloween, I wanted, because I always liked the clothing of the 18th century.
Hmm.
I had a complete suit made in the very particular, like what fabric to wear. It was actually a replica of the 18th century Royal Navy. Uh, it was an 18th century Royal Navy post captain rank. I knew the rank, and I had very particular, like, no, the gold trim has to be this width. You have to get this braid, and I told him where you have to get this one. Go here and get it. It has to be this. Like the first time they showed, they said, "Here's what it is." I said, "The trim's too narrow," and I kind of marked up everything and sent it back. This is how you redo it. They did it, and I really appreciated that. Even that was just a replica, right? The act of you know contouring it to my own designs and specifications. That's still to this day my favorite Halloween event, and that was but at the same time it was also doing something else that I wanted to do, which was to get a reproduction of what the experience would have been like to have to actually wear that, and to know, like, oh, okay, these guys must have been in cold waters all the time because this is as heavy as a winter coat if you did the material the way it should have been, and all of that. So that was certainly some element of getting a little bit more subjectively connected to the act of what I'm wearing. And that was just for a moment in time.
No, my clothes, I aim for two things: feeling comfortable in the clothes and
Right.
feeling psychologically secure. All right, and that's the thing I appreciate about Brooks Brothers. And it's not that I'm plugging Brooks Brothers. I'm plugging finding the clothing manufacturer that does this function, this dual function. Because when I'm wearing Brooks Brothers, I feel I can walk in anywhere and I'll fit in, or not fit in. That's the wrong word. But I will be treated with a measure of deference, but not like automatic respect. Because look, clothes do make the man, and to anybody who claims otherwise, he's an idiot. You know, if you show up dressed like a hobo, you're going to be treated like a hobo. You show up dressed in nice clothes, not necessarily formal clothes, but nice clothes, and you will be treated much better automatically. And people instinctively will kowtow to you. It's you show up.
Well, you'll notice this is a legitimate thing. I've heard it many times. I actually follow this principle. Well, there's two versions of it. One is, the line you've probably heard it: dress for the job you want to have.
Yep.
Invariably, that means dressing a rank or two above you. And in consulting, we will also do this, which is we find out what the dress code is for the client, and we intentionally dress one step up. So if they were pure casual, we do business casual. If they were business casual, we'll wear a suit coat. If they wear suit coats, we wear suit coats and ties. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a great believer in overdressing if need be, to put people in line sometimes. Sometimes showing up in a suit and tie and with French cuffs. Yeah. It puts people like, okay, shit, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. Can I help you, sir? And just the fact that you're wearing a costume, and that's interesting because the French call it costumes. They call suits. They that's what they call them. And because you are sort of like pretending to the outside world of something that you are. You yourself said so. You're admitting to the fact that you're finding out about your clients and dressing one step up to pretend to a superiority over them, right?
Yes.
It's a psychological thing, and it puts them in their place. And ultimately, that's what you want now, isn't it? You want to be able to get what you want in the world, and you need other people to get the things that you want, and therefore it pays you to put them in a certain psychological box, because once they're in that box, they are more likely to do something that you want for you.
Right.
Yeah.
It also gives them confidence in a weird way. They say, okay, these guys are well put together. They go in with a sense of, okay, I think these guys know what they're doing, as opposed to, we still have to confirm that. But it's better than kind of going in as schlubs and then we automatically find ourselves in an adversarial position that we don't need to.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because how can I put it? There's so many times when you walk into a restaurant and you're well dressed and you walk in with no reservation and you get a nice table. You get a terrific table based sometimes just on how you come across. And a restaurant is a trivial issue. The much more important things that matter sometimes. I remember when I was selling the idea of producing films to potential investors in Chile, and they'd show up to the meeting and I was dressed in a suit. Sometimes I was dressed better than they were, and they were like, "Oh shit, this is like serious." Fucking A, it was, and automatically it put them on not on a defensive posture, because after all I was selling them something, but a completely different posture than what they had anticipated. This wasn't some scruffy little fly-by-night shit, and because of it, there was a big difference. It was, yeah.
And even in that, and I agree with everything that was discussed, but what we should stress is all of those examples still by and large manifest a functional goal with the clothing, right? I overdress for the sake of clients respecting me. You overdress at the restaurant, for the sake of getting a nice table. There's a certain thing, and I would argue mentally, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that may speak to the, certain things, but it doesn't speak to the art of it. To me, it would be a true artistic act to dress like that without any care or deference as to what you're going to get from it.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree that that the way that you and I discuss dressing is a utilitarian and strategic manner, and we're not thinking of dressing for the sake of dressing, you know. But there are some people who do. There was that kind of weird, creepy guy who wore those hats, and in the documentary, he explained how he would take them off and change them. That he would sort of like take one off and cover his face, and then like sneak in the other hat, which I thought was kind of bizarre. But I have to admit, you know, that was kind of like just bizarrely artistic, but a bizarre form of self-expression that I found kind of riveting, to tell you the truth.
No, there is something to it. But here's what's so weird about that. I know that guy was very memorable. But here's the thing with those guys. They come from a very long tradition. There has been a history. Our term fop comes from it. It was from the 18th century. There were these effete men, likely gay. They didn't ever explicitly say so, but it was assumed that they were. So 18th century male clothing is, for all those, I recommend you look it up if you've never seen it. It is already ornate for most men. These guys take it to a whole level. This was the period when we're all wearing the powdered wigs. Yeah. These guys were wearing gargantuan powdered wigs, literally like half their size. Towers to tower over. And they came up with, you know, and in Amadeus, if you've seen it, Amadeus had the pink powder. They were the ones who did that. Usually the powder was either white, gray, or black, depending on the wig. To just, you know, it's basically standard. You augmented the, you know, the standard color of what the wig should have been. These guys were saying, no, add pink, add blue. Blue in particular was the color that
they were the original blue hairs.
Exactly. They were the original blue hairs, and they overdid it on purpose because they wanted people to look at them. Yeah. And they continued into the 19th century. And that guy with the hat and everything, he is completely taking his style. Not 100% completely, but he is a carbon copy of Quentin Crisp, who would also do this. Quentin Crisp, who also lived a lot like Bill Cunningham, by the way, although Quentin Crisp wore the clothing he liked, but he also lived in a very small apartment with very little accoutrement. And, you know, he famously never cleaned it. And he says, oh, don't worry, after the fourth year, the dust doesn't get any worse kind of attitude. But, you know, same idea. And these guys, interesting enough, even though they are to a certain extent expressing themselves, but they're expressing themselves even so within the rules and kind of expectations that class of guy would have. So that was kind of interesting to me, in that, yes, it was, but it was within like a very strict parameters always. I forgot who said it. Someone said, like, ironically enough, you're able to express yourself more when you actually have very concrete bounds.
Yeah.
If you will. To work within the bounds, that's where you kind of sharpen your creative potential.
You are most free often within very strict boundaries, because once you have those boundaries that are very strict, even if they're arbitrary boundaries, you're able to explore it better. I do believe that. I think that's why certain art that self-limits itself insofar as doing certain things sometimes is more profound than art that is quote-unquote freer. Because if you have no boundaries whatsoever, then you're just like, bebopping along to nowhere. You know what I mean? But one of the things I've noticed about fops and the foppery is that they're the most interesting people. You know?
They are.
And that's the thing, because, you know, practicals, the guys such as you and I, we're kind of boring compared to those guys. I mean, we can't hold a candle. Although I do suspect that ultimately we live a better life than those fops. I mean, the stories I've heard of fops in general is that they never come to a happy end. And they always have a period where they're riding high, but then it always kind of like decays and eventually crashes. I mean, I'm thinking of like Oscar Wilde, who could be defined as a fop, right?
Yes, he was.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a miserable kind of life for a little bit of a fleeting kind of glory. You know what I mean? It's yeah. On the other hand, like women's clothes, because we've been talking about men's clothes, women's clothes and women who wear interesting clothes. How can I put it? For the most part, it's not the beautiful women. The beautiful women always wear fashionable clothes. And what happens is with fashionable clothes is that they become instantly out of fashion and therefore passé. It was A.N. Wilson who had this great line. I'm completely paraphrasing it because I don't remember the line precisely. But he said, he pointed out that the Queen of England, has no fashion sense, famously, right? She always wears sort of like the frumpy clothes, those pastel outfits with the hat and the handbag, right? And because she's always out of fashion, when you look through pictures of her over the decades, everybody else around her is fashionably dressed, and so they look of their time. Whereas the Queen is wearing her own frumpy, outfits, and so she looks timeless.
She has a style. She has her own style, and it's not like other queens were like that. No, a lot of them did have their particular style. It's funny how monarchs tend to do this. This is very common amongst them, and it's not just the queens either. Mm-hmm. Victoria had her style, and Elizabeth II had her style, but Edward VII, the Edwardian era, all of that is based on his style. Those frock coats and the way that they wore their hats and everything. Very for those of you who have seen the movie version of Howard's End, that's all based on the way that Edward VII, Queen Victoria's son, would dress. It's very odd how they do that. Well, I mean, not odd. I mean, it makes sense, right? They are not bound by virtue of their position to feel the necessity to be a la mode.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
They, in some sense, have the ability to define it. Right? And in Queen Elizabeth's example, her style is defined by the fact that no one else would ever wear that. Right? Unless you're like a frumpy old grandmother. But you're kind of bringing up a good point. It's usually the women whose styles I remember tend to be the older grand dames.
Or not the particularly attractive ones.
Right.
Yeah. It's like the ones who are pretty. Catherine Deneuve. She was one of the most gorgeous women ever, quite frankly. I mean, really just breathtakingly beautiful woman. And the fact that she was a fairly stupid woman, you could tell. I mean, like in a literal empty-headed kind of way. And so because of that, her lack of expressiveness, because of few thoughts going through her pretty little head, she always had this very iconic look with a slightly arched brow. And she was trivial, but gorgeous. But the thing is, see, she's not memorable for her fashion sense. Not at all. Whereas other women, like the Queen, memorable. I mean, what other woman that you'd say is like instantly recognizable by her fashion sense who's not attractive?
Well, the one example I have, it's interesting because it's not necessarily what she wore, but what she created for others. Edith Head. That's trollish. Yeah. She's a trollish, ugly-looking woman, but she defined all of Hollywood.
She's Edna Mode, by the way. In The Incredibles, if you ever see The Incredibles, there's a fashion designer, Edna Mode. That's basically Edith Head. That's what she looked like. I don't think she was that short, but close. Also, the other example, and people always get pissed when I say, I'm not the only one who says this. Other people have noticed it, and they all get shit for it, but I think they're all accurate. Margaret Thatcher did have also a style. Yeah, but it was very of the time. I mean, she did have the big shoulder pads and stuff. She was a bit an 80s woman, right?
Well, a little bit the shoulder pads for sure, but there was also the way she would wear those suit and skirt kind of things, and her hair.
Well, the person that we this neck of the woods of the internet we loathe, but she did have a style, was Hillary Clinton.
The pantsuit, yeah. Oh my God,
the pantsuit, that's her. I mean, shit, you didn't have to say. You just said pantsuit, and everybody knew who you were talking about, right?
Right.
She had a style. I personally find it kind of horrific, right? Because she was basically using the pantsuit.
But recognizable.
Very recognizable. Very recognizable. She was using it to hide her big hips that were really obese hips, just enormous hips that just were very unflattering, and few clothes could really hide that except pantsuits. And so, she had that style, uniquely her own. Kind of horrifying, but there you go. I mean, I
guess the only woman who is attractive who does have her own style Um, but you may critique it. I think Jackie Kennedy also.
Well, I am very. I think that Jacqueline Kennedy was. I tend to think that people see her as in rose tinted glasses or whatever. And I think also the thing is, see, we sort of like we tend to, post hoc we tend to confuse her style with Twiggy's style, you know. But I don't know. I mean, there's two issues fashion-wise insofar as Jacqueline Kennedy is that, you know, when she was Jacqueline Kennedy and when she was Jacqueline Onassis, right? She had that 70s look, that Twiggy look, right? And before that, when she was Jacqueline Kennedy, she had that, you know, kind of like 50s, you know, glamorous girl kind of look. I don't think that there's anything memorable about her style. Unlike, say, Audrey Hepburn in, you know, the Holly Golightly character, what you call it, the Breakfast at Tiffany's, right?
Yes.
And I think a lot of it, we're sort of like, we look at her, at Jacqueline Kennedy from that point of view. I can't believe we're talking about fucking fashion and Jacqueline Kennedy and shit, but okay, let's.
The thing is, she's still, it's her hair that's memorable to me. And the thing is, just as much as it, I often tend to mistake it for the clothing. That sounds ridiculous, but the clothing and the hair tend to be a
I
unifying
agree.
combination.
Yeah.
And the other woman who also had style, and I guess she kind of was from, because I don't think she was entirely attractive, was Mary Tyler Moore.
No, when she was young, she was very attractive.
You know? Well, yeah, but she was copying Jacqueline Kennedy, when she was young. I'm thinking about Mary Tyler Moore in the 70s, Mary Tyler Moore show, with her hair and their fucking bag. And
I don't know if she was copying. I mean, it was more that she was just, you know, an attractive brunette, you know. But I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say that. But Twiggy certainly had a profound impact on women's fashion. But we're talking about historical fashion. I want to get to the issue of art, and we've like pushed this conversation to over an hour. So I don't know whether to press on or call it a podcast and catch up on this question. Because let me ask you something. Do you agree that there are certain pieces of clothing that really sort of like transcend the utilitarian aspect of clothing a person for whatever purpose and become art? You know,
yes,
certain wedding dresses or certain clothes or whatever, certain outfits that you say, this is a work of art. The designer who made this created a work of art.
I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because I do too. You know, by the nature of the show, this is a podcast, so we can't show you pictures of what we'd consider art. But there's certainly stuff that you'd say, yes, this is artistically meritorious. And like I said earlier, I think it's like clothes by Armani, clothes by Versace was just the complete antithesis of that. I think of that incredible dress that Elizabeth Hurley wore at the Oscars in '95. The black dress held together by safety pins, by gold safety pins. That was an incredible dress. I mean, Elizabeth Hurley is one of the most beautiful women. Certainly one of the most beautiful women of her generation. And this is, you know, remember 20 years ago. I mean, she was 20-something at the time. She was gorgeous. And I remember I was in Los Angeles working at the time, and everybody was abuzz about that dress. She looked so fucking hot, you know? But it was just like, it wasn't just that she looked sexy. It was cool. It was a cool dress, you know? And there was something...
But I mean, those are certainly notable examples. I think even further back, I had mentioned, you know, my fondness for the uniforms of the British Royal Navy. Many uniforms do that for me, but also extending it further, you know, the armor of the Japanese samurai certainly is one. It goes above and beyond the utilitarian function.
Yeah.
The kimonos of Japan, and even to tie it back to, you know, the Catholic Church and whatnot. Also, the regalia of the prelates, also very much, and it's intentional to do that. They know what they're doing when the Catholic Church dresses that way.
Because ultimately what they're doing there is what we are doing when we dress up for a business meeting, right? They're trying to impress and cause a certain kind of effect on the audience. And ultimately, that is what art is about, isn't it?
They're trying to elevate the environment in which you, if we will, because it's for them, it's certainly a function. There's a goal going on there. The For those in the Catholic Church will know this. Each Mass is a replica of the Last Supper by intent,
Right.
and in so doing, and they don't just believe like, oh, it's a great memory of it. No, you are literally reproducing it. The host and the wine become the literal body and blood of Christ, and the whole regalia, the incense, the candles, the robes that the priests wear. It's an intentional effort to remove you from the material world and into the transcendental space by design. And art, in some sense, does that. I mean, that's why when people don't dedicate themselves to a religion, they find something more important than themselves in what they artistically consume or depict. That's why people dedicate themselves to movies, to books, whatever. Yes, fashion can do that as well. And in some sense, it has a very crisp, clear, physical manifestation of it, too. And to your point, it is both something you can watch and participate in by wearing.
Mm. Yeah. Well said. So let's leave it at that. Yeah, this has been a good podcast. I really enjoyed talking about these subjects because it's sort of like, a little bit different, but the Cunningham guy, go check out that documentary.
It's free, by the way. It was made through Zeitgeist Films. If you go to their website, you can see the whole thing.
Yeah. So I'll leave the link in the description. Go check it out. Bill Cunningham, New York, 2010, a wonderful documentary. So do check it out. It's worthwhile. And so anyway, with that, I will bid you a fond farewell. Thank you very much for listening to the Coach and Benway podcast, and we will see you soon. Take care.